and we have the great and powerful and wonderful Theodore, the man Holden. Yes, the man Holden. We got to say it right. We got Valkyrie, the Ice,
Okay, have
McGill.
we been live?
We are live,
Yeah.
gentlemen.
Oh, and have we been live up until just now, or like what?
Oh, we're live now.
I sort of thought we.
Let's
Okay.
rock it, boy. Tell us.
So that we're talking about the question of whether or not stars or dwarf stars like Jupiter and Saturn used to be have ever been sentient, right? And in other words, it seems like a terribly strange idea to one of us, right? But all of ancient literature is written as if they were. Okay. I mean, everything in the Bible, everything in Homer's books, right? The Iliad, the Odyssey, all these stories are written as if these ancient pantheon gods were sentient, as if, it might make sense to communicate with one of them. Now, you've heard me say that these pantheon gods and goddesses had three aspects. One was the celestial object associated with the god or goddess, right? In other words, it's something they were worshiping, things you saw in the sky. It could be a moon, it could be other planets, it could be the two dwarf stars, right? It's like if you had a bunch of primitive people like in our society, who were going to try to come up with an astral religion just straight off the top of their heads, right? Then the two things they would end up worshiping would be the sun and the moon, right? Maybe Venus, if you want to make three, right? But it's like, the two chieftain gods of every one of these older religions were the two dwarf stars, Jupiter and Saturn. And that makes no sense if you project our own solar system the way it's constructed presently back into the past 10 or 15,000 years, right? It makes no sense at all. There's no way anybody in our present world would be worshiping two things that you can barely see if you know where to look, right? So you've got, I said there were three aspects to one of these pantheon gods or goddesses in the ancient religions. There was the planet itself, or the star itself. There was the idol, or more than one idol, right, for any one god or goddess, right? But I mean, you would have idols which represented those gods and goddesses on earth, right? And then you would have the internalized voices which people were hearing, coming from those idols. Okay, and use the same phraseology, right? Julian Jaynes used the same phraseology of priests going through rituals, right? These rituals involved opening of the mouth of these idols so that the people in the village or the town could hear them speak. They could hear this internalized voice coming from the idol, okay? And you find that same locution, you find that same phraseology in the Bible, in the story of Balaam and the donkey, right? And, if you go back before the flood, right, then communication with animals was supposedly easy, right? In other words, Eve just walks out into the backyard and strikes up a conversation with the snake, as if everybody knows women can talk to snakes, right? There's nothing that needs to be explained or anything, right? Whereas, after the flood, after the Tower of Babel collapsed, then, in order for Balaam to communicate with this donkey, something unusual, something out of the ordinary has to happen. So it says that God opened the mouth of the ass, so that Balaam could communicate with him, right? And so you've got that kind of thing going on. Now, when you start talking about the dwarf stars, Jupiter and Saturn, then you've got a question, right? Now, like I say, the ancient literature, all of it is written as if it was possible to communicate with those things. The prophets and oracles whose intention was to communicate with the pantheon gods and goddesses and to understand what they wanted us to be doing, what was the right way to go about doing something, look for information, right? So, you would have to assume that what I'm starting to assume at this point is that the whole thing that you see in a solar system is driven by information. Everything that goes on with living worlds is driven by information, right? It's like the total failure of those fruit fly experiments. They went for 50 years, 60 years, subjecting those fruit flies to everything in the world that is known to cause mutations and then recombine the mutants every possible way. And all they ever got, they expected something to turn up other than fruit flies. The only thing they ever got was fruit flies. Okay, and that's because the whole thing is driven by information. The only information that ever was in that picture was the information for fruit fly, right? And they figured that out like in the 1960s when they discovered RNA, DNA. So I mean, DNA and RNA is an information system. I mean, it's exactly like a computer code, like MX. We call it MXL or not like similar to HTML, right? But it's like XML. That's what you call that. It's just a basis for creating communication systems, right? Now, getting back to the question of bananas, you've got like a small percentage of our genetic structure shared with hominids, like the Neanderthal. I believe that that doesn't come from interbreeding with hominids. There's no way in the world humans could ever interbreed with hominids, any more than we could interbreed with horses or donkeys, right? That's a ridiculous proposition. Nonetheless, you've got like a very much higher percentage of human DNA we share with the banana, right? And more than half, right? I mean, Valkyrie, you've seen that before, all right?
Yes.
Okay, so why would you suspect that humans would share more than half of the DNA with the banana, right? Does that come on from eating bananas forever, pretty much? You said the banana was a perfect food for humans.
Yeah.
Right, that you'd seen that.
Where I read that from, but
I think there's another possible way to explain that. I think there's another possible way to explain that, and this is really weird. I'll tell you what the weird possible way to explain something like that might be. Okay, the weird way to explain something like that says that that we probably you've had like different saltations of different kinds of creatures on Earth in past ages, right? You've had carnosaurs and you've had sauropod dinosaurs. You've had theropods. You've had like all kinds of Ice Age megafauna, like the terror bird. You've had, oh God, no, it's got like 95% or 90% at least of all the things that have ever lived on Earth are extinct now, right? Did somebody on spaceships bring every one of those creatures here to Earth from somewhere else in the universe? I mean, I don't think so. What I believe is probably more likely is that somehow or other.
But Theo, we have an issue. When we talk about the Bible, we got Noah's Ark, and he had marsupials. He had how did he get the kangaroos? I'm trying to figure that one out myself.
Okay, look, I can explain that. It's like, but hold the thought, okay? Don't let that thought go away, because it's like, the story of the flood and the ark and all that kind of stuff is another interesting story. But I wanted to finish talking about bananas. It's like, what I believe is the way that all these different kinds of animals get is that the information for those animals can make it from anywhere in the universe to here in real time. Right? I don't think it takes any time for these morphic fields to go anywhere. Okay? I believe that when conditions on Earth become right, in past ages it has been the case at least, that when conditions on Earth became right for some particular kind of animal, there was a possibility that the planet itself would pick up that information for that particular kind of animal from the morphic field and create them. Okay, it's like a cookbook. I think that's basically what was happening. So that like when conditions on the Earth became right for sauropod dinosaurs, then the Earth itself might have said, hey, why not? Let's see what those look like. It's like you've got the cookbook right here. It's got the information to create a sauropod dinosaur. I said, hey, sure. That's like out there in one of these morphic fields at any rate, Rupert Sheldrake's, right? That's old age, at any rate. So you've got the possibility, I think, that when circumstances change, when circumstances become favorable for a particular kind of thing on a particular kind of planet, I don't think you have to have like somebody out there whose job it is in the universe to go out there, seeding these planets. It's like, I think when a particular planet in some new solar system becomes capable of supporting a particular kind of animal, that information is right there, and the planet may decide that doesn't have to. The planet may decide, well, that's interesting. I'd like to see what one of those look like. That would be how you would have gotten humans to. That would be how you would have gotten humans to the Earth. In the first, not to the Earth, but to Ganymede in the first place. In the first place, I think we pretty much determined that the original place which had humans in our solar system was this largest moon of Jupiter's, right, at Ganymede. So the question is, how did humans get to Ganymede in the first place? They sure as hell didn't evolve there. I mean, we know that the theory of evolution is a bunch of bullshit. The question is, I believe that you're looking at what Rupert Sheldrake's morphic fields, right? And you're looking at the information being available, like when the situation arose, right? Now, what about bananas, right? If this is an absolute perfect food for humans, you got everything that you need to feed and nourish humans, then what I believe it got is that the genetic information to create bananas is present in humans, right? And that says that the planet didn't have to go out looking for what to feed humans once it created them here. Do you understand what I'm saying? It was exactly as if, suppose I would walk into a pet store, right? And I'd never seen a cat, I'd never seen a kitten, I'd never even seen a picture of a cat or a kitten. I'd never even read about cats in any kind of a book or anything. I had no idea what to feed a cat, right? But I saw a cat over there, and I said, man, I mean, this little guy is cute, right? I want him. So I'm gonna, tell the storekeeper that, I need this cat over here. But like, what do I feed him, right? I mean, probably don't feed him steaks, probably don't feed him candy bars or cookies, or, well, do you have some sort of a little book of information as to how to feed cats and how to take care of them? Well, I mean, I think that's probably what this information for bananas is in humans, a human genome. In other words, like I said, when you first had humans living on Ganymede, well, then the information for what to feed humans was right there. It was contained, it's an information system. It's like the information for what to feed the humans was there, and as a package in the package. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, I've got absolutely, I do not own a time machine. I've got absolutely no way of demonstrating any of this. This is just straight off the top of my head, right? But that's what I come up with as of right now. That this is the kind of thing that you're talking about. I have a very hard time picturing anybody being the gopher, in the universe and taking like different kinds of animal species around whenever any kind of a planet becomes capable of supporting those species. Right now, there's a body of theory which goes into this. Right? Are you familiar with the idea of a Fermi paradox?
Yeah.
Okay. Here's what the Fermi paradox. Excuse me. Here's what the Fermi paradox means. Okay, it says, named after the same Enrico Fermi, whose name you're familiar with. The paradox says that we should see a whole lot more aliens than we ever do, right? I mean, seeing aliens should be an everyday kind of a thing. Now, the reason is because even giving like a technological level, and all you would need is one. You'd need one planet in the Milky Way, which had a civilization just a couple of hundred years more advanced than ours is now. That's all you would need, right? So they're sitting there and they're thinking, well, gee, it's like, are there other people like us out there in the Milky Way? Let's see if we can find out. Might take us 20 million years to find out, right? But I mean, that's not even, according to geological theories, right? That's not a whole lot of time. So it's like, let's build like about 5 or 10 robot ships and send them out to, 10 different directions in the Milky Way. And on each one of these robots, you've got communications equipment and everything, and you've got industrial, robotized, automated industrial equipment. So it's like each one of these is going to go out looking for anything that resembles a solar system like ours, where you've got at least one planet where you can mine metals, right? So one of these things is going to find another solar system. It's like, it's going to, where you have the capability, you've got at least one body where you can mine metals and materials. It's going to construct 10 copies of itself, right? And then it's going to look around and it's going to see, are there any people, are there any dogs or cats or anything living around here? Send a report back home, right? And then I'm going to send these 10 copies of myself out in 10 new directions, do the same process. You've got a geometric progression, right? Within a space of 20 million years, it should cover the Milky Way, right? And that civilization should be able to map out the Milky Way and determine like who all lives where. Right now, if you suppose so that this group of people, right, believed in evolution. They all had pictures of Charles Darwin sitting around, right? And they all believed in deep time, right? Which I don't believe in, which no rational theory has any use for, right? But it's like, nonetheless, assuming everybody in the picture here is Darwinists, and they figure, well, this is how long is it going to take to evolve humans, like for any other kind of a complex life form like us to have evolved? You're talking about 2 or 3 billion years, right? Now, so 20 million years doesn't really mean very much to that, right? So in other words, this is the Fermi paradox. By all rights, it's like these people out checking out the Milky Way should have made contact with us a number of times, right? We shouldn't have to go back very far into our own past to see aliens, right? And I'll start believing in aliens first time I ever see one of them. As of right now, things I do believe in are going to be like hominids, like the Neanderthal, which is the apex creature for dark worlds, and then humans, which are the apex creature for bright worlds. Like Earth is now, like Ganymede was 60,000 years ago. Okay, gray aliens, all these other kinds of things, reptilians, these things that you read about. I mean, I don't have any reason to believe in anything like that. I mean, I'm not. Excuse me, I'm not totally hostile to the idea. I believe that's the first time I ever see it. So, at any rate, that's sort of a thought on morphic fields and on information, right? Now, that also says that if there was anything to the idea of there being any sort of a gopher in the universe, like going around from star system to star system, whenever some sort of a new planet becomes capable of supporting dinosaurs or capable of supporting bats or birds or whatever, bring them there. I mean, that's nonsensical. The whole thing has to be driven by information. It has to be explainable in the kinds of terms that Rupert Sheldrake uses. That seemed to make much sense. There were a couple of other things that I wanted to go over, but I mean, that was sort of like one of the major ones. So, Val, does that seem like a reasonable explanation for a lot like banana DNA in humans?
Possible. We don't know.
I'm sorry? Yeah, Ode, what about you? It's like, does that seem to make much sense?
Well, for me, it made a lot of sense. And it actually does support its case claim. And it also explains how we genetically have been scattered, as we would say, across this planet as well. But there's also a point that I miss and I don't really understand. I mean, example, we say that Noah, once again, I'm going back to my boy Noah, which goes right with your topic. He got the marsupial. Well, the marsupials are found in Australia.
Okay, look, let me run a couple of things. Yeah, let me run a couple of things by you. Okay, it's like, yeah, so that's good. You brought back the idea. I wanted to keep that on the top of your head. Okay, so I'm getting too old to keep things like that on the top of my head anymore. It's like, but you wanted to talk about the Wallace line and about marsupials and why you don't have any trail of marsupial bones leading from the Caucasus down to southern India, right? The books of the Bible are written by the descendants of Noah. Okay, how much do you think they ever knew about Australia or China? Probably not a hell of a lot, right? So what you get is, the books of the Bible are written as if nobody survived outside the ark. Okay, that's what they knew. They didn't know anything else. It's like the literatures of other nations talked about, small groups of humans and other animals surviving here and there on high places or anything that could float for the better part of a year, right? And, you have what they call a Wallace line, which separates the creatures of, like the Australian group, right? Tasmania, New Zealand, all those areas, right? Solomon Islands, all those kinds of places, right? Separates that living world from the living world. In other words, I believe that probably 90% of the animals in the world owe their existence to Noah, but not all, right? Not 100%. I believe you've got the creatures of Australia and New Zealand and all those places survived in and around Australia somehow or other. Now, it is an article of faith amongst evolutionites and academic deadwood that the story of the flood is a fairy tale or an aggrandized version of some kind of a story of a local flood in or around the Black Sea. Now, that's bullshit. I mean, the story of the flood is a global story, and it's like all antique nations have some sort of a version of the flood story.
Correct.
Okay. And if you start to understand that you can use the Bible itself as historical evidence, then you've got a marvelously powerful tool in your hands, right? The books of the Bible are written as if the biggest problem in the world was sin, right? I mean, Jewish and Christian theologians spend an awful lot of time worrying about sin. And right, the approach that I recommend is the approach of Calvin Coolidge. How much do you know about Calvin Coolidge? Okay. To Calvin, it was like a sort of an archetypal, strong, silent type. I mean, he was a man of few words, right? I mean, you had like a newspaper person once told him, "I bet my wife, if I could get you to say 3 words tonight," he said, "You lose," right? And then there was a day that Calvin Coolidge, was president of the United States, right, in the late 1920s, comes home from church one morning. It's like his wife had a cold or something, couldn't make it to church, right? And she asked him what the sermon was about that day. He said, sin, right? And she said, what did Pastor Brown have to say about it? He said he was against it. Yeah, that strikes me as sin to me is like a failure of moral strength. Okay, that says too much of a tendency to go along with the crowd, too much of a tendency to, too much of a sheep instinct. I mean, too much of a tendency to, these are kinds of decisions that people make when they're just following the crowd, right? When they're not thinking about what they're doing, when they're not worrying about the effect that whatever it is they're doing is going to have on other people and other whatever, right? That's as much as you should spend time as you should spend worrying about sin, just trying to avoid it, right? But the books of the Bible and the Jewish literature is written as if sin was the biggest problem in the universe right now. The story of the flood is written as if the flood itself was brought about by sin on the part of man. Okay, and I think you can toss that idea. Okay, the flood was a physical event. Physical events have physical causes. Okay, it's like, I don't think sin have anything to do with it. Now, there's well, let me just run this by. I don't think I need any pictures of this. I've got a little thing about this up on my my Steam It blog, right? I mean, I can describe this. You've got chapter 7 of Genesis, which talks about the 7 days before the flood. Genesis 7:4, 7:10, right? It says, you know, the Lord, behold, for yet 7 days, and I shall cause blah, blah, blah. And so it came to pass after 7 days that the waters of the flood were upon the earth, right? And, you know, you would read that and you would wonder, like, what is he talking about, right? I mean, what is the deal with these 7 days before the flood? And you could ask all the preachers and all the parsons and all the rabbis in your own town, your own city, what that means and what that's about. And there's not much of a chance you would get a reasonable answer. I can give you the reasonable answer because there is one. Okay. There's one other place in the Bible that talks about the 7 days before the flood. I can tell you where that is. That's in Isaiah, like 30:26. Isaiah 30:26. Particularly if you have a copy of the King James Bible, it's a little bit easier to read, right? The authors of the King James, or the editors of the King James, have the decency, you know, when they found some kind of an ancient, when they didn't understand the context of one of these old stories, they have the decency to leave the language the way they found it on the off chance that somebody 400 years later might figure out what it meant. Okay, that's exactly what's happened in this story. There's an easy way to misinterpret that section of Isaiah. The Lord, you know, where Isaiah is. Let me run what this thing is about. It's Isaiah 30:26. He's talking about the end of the world somewhere else in far time, and he makes a very vague reference, which he doesn't bother to explain because he assumes everybody in his audience knows what the reference is. He says, "The light of the moon shall be as the light of the sun, and the light of the sun shall be sevenfold as the light of 7 days," right? And if you didn't know any better, what does that sound like it means? It means, well, it's going to be as bright as if you were to somehow cram 7 days worth of daylight into 1 day. That's what it sounds like it means, isn't it? And the Yuppie Bibles, the new International Bible, you know, which I would recommend getting rid of, but the Yuppie Bibles insert the word full, you know, to let mistranslation in place, right? They say the light of the sun shall be sevenfold as the light of 7 full days. Now, the word full is not there in the King James, right? In the King James, it reads, you know, the light of the sun shall be sevenfold as the light of 7 days, and it should read as the light of the 7 days, because what appears to be the case is that it was translated out of some language like Russian that doesn't use articles, right? Are you familiar with the reason that you don't have articles of words like V or A in Russian, right? When you have 6 or 7 declension cases, you don't need articles. So the idea of articles just flummoxes Russians. You know, you'll hear Russians say things like, you know, dog chased cat up tree, right? You'll almost never hear a Russian say the dog chased the cat up the tree, right? You know, the dog, the cat. You know, it's alien to them to say things like that. Okay. So the way the thing should have been translated is, you know, that the light of the sun shall be sevenfold as the light of these 7 days. And they're talking about those 7 days back there in Genesis 7:4 and 7:10. And in fact, the full body of rabbinical literature absolutely makes the connection between Isaiah 30:26 and Genesis 7:4, 7:10. And what they, and in fact, there's a compendium of these stories. And in fact, Val, you've got that sitting there because I don't want to die of old age and have that sitting around here and just get burned, right? So you've got that sitting there. That 7-volume Legends of the Jews of Louis Ginsburg's, right? And this was one of Emanuel Velikovsky's major resources. You know, any kind of a thing for which you needed sources, midrashic sources, that was Velikovsky's go-to resource, right? And I think that's like on page 185 of volume 5 of that thing. I think you could find that, right? What they say is that the Lord turned, that for the 7 days before the flood, the Lord turned on the primordial lights of the universe to commemorate the death of Methuselah for 7 days, like prior to the flood, right? Because he didn't want, Methuselah to die at the same time as the sinners, right? Which is everybody outside the ark. Okay, so what they're really saying is this, they're saying the Lord turned on the primordial lights of the universe. That's their language. In our language, we would say that there was something similar to a nova condition, either close to or inside our own system right now. If our own sun is a main sequence star, if a main sequence star like our sun would go nova, we would, in our own system, we would not be sitting here talking about it. Would have fried the whole system to cinders. Okay, so what's the next thing down on the list of things which could get everybody's attention and create, like a huge amount of light for 6 or 7 days? Talking about a dwarf star flare, right? So what they're really saying is one of the two dwarf stars flared, right, which is going to be Saturn. And so you have this dwarf star flare, and then 7 days of intense light and radiation, and then the flood, right? The waters of the flood came from Saturn, right? Now, so that's the story. So the flood is not a fairy tale, and it's not an aggrandized version of a story of some local flood. Okay, the story of the flood is real, and it's not only a story of a global flood, it's a story of a system-wide event, a solar system-wide calamity, which affected everything in the system, right? I mean, completely rearranged the order of the system. This had to do with this final capture of the southern group, Saturn, Neptune, Mars, and Earth was captured as a group, right? And that was the proximate cause of the flood and the megafauna die out, right? That you had like maybe more like 10 or 12,000 years before Christ, right? Now you've got the Australian and the New Zealand animals, which are below this Wallace line. You've got a line which you can draw that part of the earth, around Indonesia, right? In which on one side of the line you've got the Australian type animals, on the other side of the line you've got the like cats and dogs and bears and birds and every kind of a thing that we're normally familiar with. Oh, and does that sort of clear some of that stuff up? I mean, you were flummoxed a little bit by the question of Australian animals.
That was actually the best answer I've heard yet. I mean, because everybody wants to say that yes, there was a flood, blah 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 blah, but it's like, excuse me, there's lots of things that happened during that time period, and you're one of the first people I've heard say it was a solar flare, because that right there would rock the earth. It would turn the caps to the water to flood the earth, and it would shift the earth as well.
It's actually
And nothing to do with sin at all. Look, it's like how much you know about Friedrich Nietzsche?
Oh, I know Nietzsche. Nietzsche is one of my favorites.
I'm sorry. Let me tell you something funny about Friedrich Nietzsche, okay? Because I don't have much use for the guy, but okay, there was never anything wrong with Nietzsche's use of logic, okay? Nietzsche's use of logic was completely sound. The problems with Nietzsche was starting assumptions that weren't valid. Okay, it's just like they say about computer programming. I'm sorry, I've got like somebody that may try to call here. It's like I have to leave that phone on. Nietzsche is infamous for something that I don't think was anything that he ever put much thought into. It was like this is sort of a minor type of a thing. It was a poem, really. It's called Thus Spake Zarathustra, right? Or Also Sprach Zarathustra, right? I mean, however you would say that auf Deutsch. And, and he says that God is dead, right? Well, God isn't dead. I mean, God is still out there, but, I mean, Nietzsche's dead, okay? But, this is not Nietzsche's main thing, right? It's like if somebody would ask me, like, what was the major thing that Nietzsche had to say to the world, according to his own thinking. I believe it was a book called Genealogy of Morals. And you could condense that whole book down to like maybe one or two paragraphs, right? But I mean, the way I would, paraphrase that whole book is to say that Jews and Christians spend too much time worrying about sin, right? It's big business, right? It's like, in other words, in the Middle Ages, it even got to the point where they had what they called, Valkyrie, help me with the word for that, right? It was like indulgences, right? Sin, pay now, sin later, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
what Luther was protesting.
pay now, sin later. It's like, there's no way to beat that. In other words, if you can't come up with some legitimate way to earn a living, right, then that's as good a racket as you would ever find, right? So, like, we're all sinners because of Adam, right, and Eve, and then we're all, and then the whole world got flooded and destroyed on account of sin, right? Well, let me tell you why I have a hard time with that, because basically you're accusing God of being an idiot, right? When you talk about God wiping the whole system over sin, right? I'll give God credit for being brighter than to wipe the whole system over sin, only to have sin back in business 40 years later as if nothing had happened. What about you, Odin? Does that make sense?
Yes, that does make lots of
Odin,
sense.
you still?
That makes more sense than anything else.
Okay, so
But there's another part to this sin and between the Torah and Christianity. I mean, I look at the Torah and I say, okay, it was never written until later in life, later ages, and it was a duplicate of older works, a lot of older works. And then you got Christianity, which is basically part two of the Torah. It's not really separate. If you really look at it, it's not
right.
separate.
Okay, listen, like what I'm saying is that one part of the keys to understanding the story of the flood is you've got to get rid of the idea of sin being involved. I'm not saying sin is a good thing. It isn't. The sin is a very bad thing.
Depends on whose rules.
It's like, you've got to try to get. Yeah, okay, but I'm telling you, that Nietzsche was absolutely right in saying that, like, Jews and Christians spend too much worrying about sin. They need to get on with their lives, right? And sin had nothing to do with the flood. And the story of the flood is the story of a natural event, right? That we got in the way of. Neither God or anything else could save us from it. Okay. Now you've got another problem in thinking about God, and that is, what exactly. And you can get rid of all the conundrums, right? And the way you get rid of the conundrums is to, the conundrums arise from a misunderstanding of the word omnipotent, right? But what is the word all-powerful supposed to mean, or omnipotent? In other words, is the word omnipotent supposed to mean having all the power that, I'm sorry?
It's supposed to be synonyms.
Yeah, no, look, it's like, the word omnipotent could mean one of two things. It could mean having all the power that anybody could imagine, and that leads to conundrums, right? Or it could mean all the power that there actually is, right? And that doesn't lead to conundrums. Okay, if you understand that, and then you've got a reasonable chance of coming up with some sort of reasonable theology, right? The story of the flood is a true story. Was there anything I left out of that just now? I don't know that there is. Like I say, you've got like Australian animals, which I don't think were saved by Noah. They survived on mountaintops or on anything, small boats. I mean, Noah wasn't the only guy that owned a boat, right, in those days. There were other people that had boats and small ships and stuff like that. And, those people would have taken dogs and cats or anything they get their hands on, made sense to try to take, right? And and then you had, like I said, just the literature of other nations, stories about, small groups of humans and other animals surviving here and there on high places, right, mountaintops, whatever. that's the basic gist of it. You've got a completely believable. So I know there was one other kind of a thing I wanted to show you. Okay, and let me, if you had any doubt in your mind as to whether that story was made up, let me.
Don't forget to share screen.
I know. Let me bring this thing up on my own screen here. Go to YouTube and YouTube. The gentleman's name is Williams, right? Williams. Here we go. Philip Williams. That's just found it. It's like it's another name that wasn't coming. They try not to get old like that. I mean, it's like it doesn't do anything any good. You got the story of Philip Williams, and let me get back to Skype for a moment and say, oh Lord, where? Oh, this is. It's not up like that, is it? It's like, here we go. Found it again. Share my screen, right? Share screen here. Okay. Share audio. Are you guys seeing my screen?
Oh yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
You doing it good this week, brother?
Okay. This is this is my man Philip Williams. He's also a member. I have like about 5 or 6 Facebook groups, right, which are all dedicated to some aspect of neo-catastrophism or the Ganymede hypothesis or this sort of thing, right? The second deck of Noah's Ark. This guy is real. This is not made up. This is like these are films taken at about 14,000 feet on Mount Ararat right now. You get people claiming that they found what remains of the ark down there at the bottom of Mount Ararat. That's bullshit. I mean, there's nothing in the Bible that says, and afterward 14,000 feet, to finally come to rest at the bottom of the mountain. Yeah, no, it's like this ark is up there where Noah left it. I mean, he had no use for the thing after the flood was over, right? I mean, he's not going to try to carry it down the mountain. Let's just look at a little bit of this. This is it's Turkey, right? You got some high mountains in this place. Did you read what that last little blurb said, Odin?
They stopped him from climbing over because he saw the
He
beams.
said that he said it's obvious that the structure that you're seeing could not possibly have been created in situ, right? In other words, where it is. You know, they couldn't have dragged all this lumber up that high and tried to build something like this. By the same token, you know, there's no way that they could build something like this and then drag it up 14,000 feet up into a mountain.
You know how you can answer
Okay, the only possible way that this...
The way you can answer that whole
I'm
situation
sorry?
is take a chip off that wood and carbon date it.
I don't know if they've done that or not right now. You've got to understand that, you know, whatever you do with this, you've got to deal with the Turkish government, which is Muslims, right?
Therefore, knowing them, I'm going to say what it was. It's probably an old mine. Because the wood is too flat.
Then what you're seeing here, for honest and for real, is the second level of Noah's Ark. Okay, there's no way anybody's going to climb to 14,000 feet and then start, let's go into the mining business. It's not going to happen. It's like there's no way anybody's going to build this thing in the ground and lift it up that high. There's no way anybody's going to drag all that timber. You know, the only explanation there could possibly be is that the waters of the flood left this thing where you see it. Okay.
Wood is too flat. It's a perfectly cut 2x4.
Yeah, those are timbers. I mean, that's not your imagination. Man, oh man.
Okay.
What do you think of that, Odin?
I got an issue. If it's that old, it'd have been stoned by now. He touched the wood.
I don't know.
And he touched the wood.
Yeah.
If he could touch the wood, I would have snatched a little piece to carbon date that sucker. There will have to be some portions of feces. By the way, the other question you would have to be, in order to make that shit watertight, what oil
Yeah.
did they use? Because it would be seen in the ice.
I don't know. Pitch, right? It's like you said, pitch. It's like
I wonder if
for
people that's a
the
total
planks
skeptic until you can prove
themselves.
certain little points. I mean, they said the trial with
Yeah, I believe
was
that.
correct.
Look, the gentleman is a member of one of my Facebook groups. It's like he's, you can talk to him and ask him questions.
Yes, I will.
Okay, it's like all you'd have to do.
Because the oil should be found on the ice.
Okay.
That oil.
I'm sorry?
The oil of the ship that they use to sail the ocean has to be found on the ice. It's the only way to watertight the ship.
Now look, it's like this thing. You got to understand. It's like this thing did not have to move under sail. All it had to do was float. Okay.
Yeah,
this thing
but
didn't
water
have to sail
would
the
go
seven.
right into the ship especially with the odd shapes of the cuts of the wood.
according to the Bible, was sealed with pitch.
How much you
Yeah.
believe of
Okay. What
that?
do you think, Valkyrie? It's like, how does it strike you? I believe it's real.
I,
Well, they said the trial term was real
I,
too.
I saw more evidence.
Like I say, it's like you need to get rid of the idea of sin being involved. It's like, but the story of the flood itself is a true story, and I believe the story of the ark is a true story. The other thing you need to get rid of is the idea that 100% of the creatures on the earth were saved in the ark. Right? That's like I said, the creatures below the Wallace line. You can look up Wallace line on Wikipedia. Right? It's like the creatures below the Wallace line survived somehow or other around Australia. Um, there isn't any trail of marsupial bones leading from the Caucasus down to southern India, right? There's no way to believe that, that Noah saved all the wallabies and all the kangaroos and all that kind of stuff. So, that to me is my understanding of the story of the flood. I had like another couple of things we could talk about today. Let me get rid of this. Valkyrie, have you heard of or seen my little thing about like Betty Boop and Jupiter?
No.
No. That's Betty Boop, right? And those are my two Firebirds. That's like Yvonne and Irina, right? Bear Fabrique. And what they call Wangina, right? Now, one thing you notice is that like you've got like around the Mediterranean basin, you've got a lot of pictures of the Saturn system. You've got a lot of artwork and iconography of, these ancient things that you saw in the sky when the Earth was still part of the Saturnian system, right? And you've got pictures of Saturn, and you've got pictures that show Neptune and Mars, right? Saturn, and pictures which show this magic mountain, like the Birkeland current, the column of light going from Earth all the way up to Saturn, right, and passing through Mars and Neptune, and but you don't seem to have much in the way of artwork, which resembles Jupiter. Have you noticed that?
Maybe
There
they
doesn't
didn't
seem to
know
be
the
an equivalent
difference.
body of artwork, dealing.
Maybe they didn't
Most,
see
I'm
the
sorry?
difference.
most of the art of bulls might have been related to Jesus.
What I'm thinking is that it may have been the case that people living around, Iraq and Iran and Lebanon and Israel and Greece and Rome may have never had that good a look at Jupiter. For some reason they were in the wrong part of the Earth. Maybe they saw it once in a while. They knew about it. They knew that it existed, right? They knew that Jupiter was like, did this thing with thunderbolts once in a while, right? But did they ever really get much of a good look at Jupiter? I don't know. I mean, the reasons to doubt it, right? You've got this kind of a thing that they call Wangina, which is a kind of a generic type of a petroglyph that you find in Australia, right? And they've got big eyes. So at first I thought maybe it has something to do with hominids, right, because of the eyes. But no, you've got these eyelashes that go out every which way, and then you've got these what do you call that? Electrical sparks that like sparklers that go out from their heads. Okay, and you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You've got the big eyes. You've got the tufting. I mean, it almost looks like electrical tufting. Okay. And everybody has always
Or it could
assumed
be the
that these are
shrine of the
supposed to
sun
represent
god.
some kind of people.
You
I'm sorry?
remember, for us modern Christians today, they use the shining light symbol over the head of a person, meaning the sun god status, as a symbol, and they
Yeah.
use the same graphics, as I would say, for these alien beings.
Let me show you. Yeah, let me
And they were
show you what I
terrible
think this is,
artists.
okay? Because I'm going to abandon the idea that that these things represent people. Now, everybody that you would normally hear from, trying to just everybody except for Ted Holden, right? That you would normally hear from and ask about a description of Wandjina, and like, what the hell is this stuff about? Probably said, well, this is Sue, and this is Alice, and this was like Janine, and this was, a lot like people, right?
Right.
And what I tell people is that, like, if any of these, if the women, if any of these Wandjin are supposed to represent a human, there's only one human that has ever been on Earth that they could represent, and I'll show you who that one human is. It's going to be Betty Boop, who's got the eyelashes go all the way around the eyes, right?
Yep. Look at the halo over her head.
So, yeah, so at any rate, trying to say, they got the picture of the real Betty Boop there. It's like girl's name, pretty girl. Any rate, if you go, there's still pictures of Betty over there. It's Wandjina, right? Here we go. This is Esther Jones.
Right.
Right? This is the real honest to God Betty Boop, 1930s, right?
She's a knockout.
Flapper outfit. Well, yeah, certainly pretty enough. And then you've got sunspots. And what exactly are sunspots? Well, sunspots are electrical tufting that you see in areas where the electrical activity on the surface of the sun breaks down, right? What you're seeing is like you're seeing into the interior of the star. You're seeing past the surface of the star. And if a star actually was a thermonuclear furnace of some sort, then from the core of the star to the surface, and then as you kept getting further away from the core of the star, it would keep getting cooler, right? So that these sunspots wouldn't be black; they would be white or blue.
Right.
Okay. The sun was a thermonuclear furnace, right? Now, what you're seeing, the sun is basically a light bulb. It's a plasma physics phenomenon, and there are areas on the surface where the electrical activity breaks down, and you see this tufting, and you see like dark areas, right? Now, you see, this may be a slightly better picture. Now, this would be the eyelashes here. Okay, these are the eyelashes. Star spots, right? What happens is if you get on Google and look for star spots, and you start to see like dwarf stars with star spots, okay? Here you've almost got two eyes. There's a couple of them, which if you look long enough, you'll find, right, that have a couple of eyes. And see if I can find one of them like that for you. I mean, I know there are a couple of them like that here. At any rate, so that the whole idea of the Wandjina, I think, is like somebody around in Australia looking up in the sky. And that's what he's seeing. He's seeing a dwarf star, and he's seeing like star spots. And the star spots have the electrical tufting around the eyes, right, which are like the eyelashes. and close. This is, but you get the idea, right? Like I said, there are a couple of them where you've got, the two star spots sitting there like that, which you could believe that were eyes. And I've done once, this almost looks like it might be something like that. I've done one sort of a web podcast with Greg J on the subject. Not a very long thing, it's sort of a short take, right? But flare effect, at any rate. That's the idea. The question is, what would they be looking at, and seeing something like that? It's like, I don't think they'd be looking at Saturn, because as long as we had much of a view of Saturn, it was behind other bodies, right? I mean, you wouldn't see eyes like that, right? You wouldn't see the larger. The star spots on the dwarf stars are smaller. I'm sorry, I just said that wrong. Bigger, right? Relatively bigger, right? And I don't think you see that behind these other bodies, behind Neptune and Mars and Earth eventually, right? It's like, and I don't know what else there would be that you might see a star spot on it. I don't think you're going to see that on Neptune or Uranus or, the only thing that really leaves them, I would think, is Jupiter. I think probably what you're seeing, the face of Betty Boop out there is probably Jupiter. I mean, I don't have any way of demonstrating that. If I had to put money on it, that's the way I'd bet it. Okay, does that make sense?
Do you think Jupiter will ever reignite itself?
I'm sorry?
Do you think Jupiter could start its own fusion
given the right
engine?
set of look, it's like given the right set of circumstances, I think the answer is yes, but it's like you would have to get Jupiter away from the sun. And, I don't want to go there. It's like starting from where we are now, the solar system is stable, and I don't think anything else is going to change. I don't think we're going to have any more major catastrophes. The system is stable now. For the system to become unstable against something from outside of our system, would have to get to our system, right? It's like, I don't see that as very likely. I've said this once. Look, it's like when you have like a dwarf star, like when a dwarf star gets captured by a main sequence star, when something like Jupiter or Saturn gets captured by a main sequence star like our sun, then what you have is this, right? It's like you've got a 200-foot lightning rod glowing in a storm, right? And the 200-foot lightning rod is the focus of a discharge, right? And then the dwarf star gets captured, right? What you see is like the Acme lightning rod company's truck pulls up, right? And these guys get out of the truck and they build a 1,000-foot lightning rod, like maybe 300 or 400 feet away from the 200-foot lightning rod. What's going to happen, right? Well, I mean, the 200-foot lightning rod is going to go out. It'll no longer be the focal point of any kind of a discharge. Okay, so the focal point of the discharge now is the main sequence star. So when you had Jupiter and Saturn, captured by our present sun, they went out, right? They ceased being dwarf stars, became gas giant planets. And you're asking, like, could Jupiter reignite? I believe it could if something were to somehow move it out of our solar system into empty space, right? Or into the path of one of these Birkeland currents. But there isn't anything to do that, right? There's nothing. There's nothing out there which is going to move Jupiter from where it is, right? Robert Bass is one of the best mathematicians of the last century at Brigham Young University. Basically, he demonstrated that the Titus-Bode law of celestial dynamics, which gives the locations of the bodies in our system, is basically the solution to a dynamical relaxation process, right? And what that means is that you could start the bodies in our system pretty nearly anywhere within a certain range of the system. And within 2,000 or 3,000 years, they would be where they are now, right? In other words, the circumstances of the system now pretty much force the locations of the planets. And that says it for, I can't think of anything that would cause Jupiter to move or to change its location in the future, right? I mean, so that says that, like, yeah, it's theoretically possible, but in real life, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, the sun's magnetic field more or less locked.
I'm sorry? I didn't quite catch that. Valkyrie?
Valkyrie.
You awake? Any rate. Oh, and look, it's like you should understand that Valkyrie has a number of books which you might find interesting sooner or later. It's like, to get him to dig something up for you, it's like he's got that 7-volume, Legend of the Jews, right? Louis Ginsburg's. It's a monumental work, right? This is the largest body of Midrashic sources that's ever been translated into Western languages, right? This is the unabridged version of the Bible or of the Torah, right? The Bible, the Old Testament part of the Bible is basically a Reader's Digest version of what Jews call Midrashim, right? And that Louis Ginsburg's 5 or 7-volume compendium is like the largest body of Midrashim that there is in one place. I mean, it's available for readers in English or German. So that's an amazing kind of a thing, right? That's intriguing. That was Emanuel Velikovsky's most major source, for Jewish literature. Everybody else still there?
Oh yeah, we're still here.
Odin?
I'm here.
Okay. Was there anything else that I had sitting around? I don't know if I have anything else for you tonight. It's like there was a handful of things like that, right? And then you wanted to hear about the flood. The flood is an interesting story, right? Barefoot Greek, that's the new version. Might have been other. Well, I know what the other thing I was thinking about was the reason we're not like the idea of Saturn being captured. It's this item here, which I've done in the past, right? The reasons for rejecting this version of this thing that you get from the Thunderbolts group, right? That Eduardo Cardona and a number of the other Thunderbolts gurus have always claimed that, that you have this sun system, right? Maybe with Jupiter, or that they don't really have a good explanation for where Jupiter was during past ages, right? Problem, but they said that you had originally like the sun sitting there, and maybe Jupiter, maybe Mercury, right? And then you had the Saturnian system, which included, to their way of thinking, Saturn, and then Venus, and then Mars, and then Earth, right? Now, I don't believe Venus is part of the Saturnian system. That doesn't compute to my way of thinking. It's like, the hard evidence comes from two places. It comes from axis tilts and from eye sizes, right? And that says that this blue body in front of Saturn was Neptune. It wasn't Venus. But they talk about, I think that Eduardo Cardona believed that Saturn had somehow or other come into our system from the depths of space and from one of the satellite galaxies, right? And, that sounds reasonable until you think about it just a little bit. And I can tell you what the problem is.
It will shift the planets, the other planets, out of direction. If it came in from another galaxy, it would shift other planets out of the spherical spheres around the sun that we have current.
I don't know about that. The problem is that there's no good way to do it, right? It's going to take too long. We'd say something like that would take forever. It's like, we don't, I don't believe in deep time, right? Well, here's the deal. For anything to be captured by our system, right, Saturn or anything else to be captured by our sun, it would have to approach at a velocity less than the escape velocity for our system, right? Now that's terribly slow if you're talking about getting from any sort of distance outwards. Even from the nearest other main sequence star, which is Alpha Centauri, which is only about 4 light years away, even that little trip, once you say, okay, it's like the taxi cab that you're riding can't go any faster than an escape velocity for our system, well then that's going to take you like a long, long time to get from Alpha Centauri to Earth or to our own solar system, right? It's going to take thousands and thousands of years, probably tens of thousands or more. And, the whole experience of humans on Earth is not that much time, right? So I mean that doesn't really work. There's only, if you're going to shoot something, how many ways are there to shoot something? You could shoot something with an antique weapon like an atlatl or a bow, or you could shoot something with a pistol, right, which is sort of a short-range weapon. I've never seen anybody hit anything with a pistol more than, 40 or 50 yards, right? About the limit. You could shoot something with a shotgun, which says you're counting on the law of averages, right? That says you're going to have a cloud of things out there, and it's like hopefully law of averages says 2 or 3 or 4, whatever it is, going to hit something, right? Or you could aim whatever it is. You could have a rifle, and you could have, you could take deadly aim at whatever it was you wanted to shoot, and you could be further away and you'd still hit it right now. Suppose you had like something the size of Saturn sitting out there where Alpha Centauri is now, and you wanted Saturn to get captured by our present solar system. There's only 2 or 3 ways it could happen. It's like, if it's just going to come by itself, right? Well, then you'd have to have Ming the Merciless from Mongo get into the act, right? You'd have to aim something like Saturn at us from however far away Mongo is. So it'd have to be very precisely aimed. Okay, that's not too terribly likely. Okay, or you could have some kind of a cloud of Saturn-sized objects, and the law of averages just said that Saturn got captured by our present solar system. But for that to be the case, right, then because you're only talking a few thousand years ago, right? And the problem is time still, right? It's like, for Saturn to be captured, that whole cloud had to be moving at no greater velocity than the escape velocity of our system, right? So that says that the rest of that cloud of Saturn-sized objects should still be very close to us. I mean, our telescopes can actually see Proxima Centauri from 4 light years away. And I mean, that this cloud of Saturn-sized objects should be a whole lot closer than that. It'd be very easy to see. So that, you can rule that out. And the only thing that leaves, to my way of thinking, is the approach that, the conclusion that Troy McLaughlin and I drew originally, which is that every that we see in our present solar system is originally what was part of a single Herbig-Haro string, okay, created by a single Birkeland current. And it was all one thing, and it was all created within a sort of a small proximity, right? I mean, much smaller than the four light years between here and Alpha Centauri. So, I mean, that's the reason that I have for not liking the idea of Saturn or anything else being captured by our system from deep space. Sorry?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, I switched to my old headset. I'll have a chance to figure out what's going on with the new one.
Okay. Great. Everything okay? Does anybody else have any other questions or anything, you wonder about, like cosmology, this sort of thing, human origins?
I was going to point out earlier that I think it's in Bella's Cosmos where he talked about there being a large nova-like event in Saturn discharging a massive cloud of hydrogen.
Yeah.
That probably accounted for the flood, because when the hydrogen hit Earth's atmosphere, it would have joined with the oxygen and turned into water.
Let me tell what Troy McLaughlin says, Valkyrie. Says that basically, and I've checked this. It's the sources I've looked at agree. The dwarf stars are watery environments. Okay, they're like wherever you have a dwarf star, you've got water. Okay, I don't think you have to wait for some planet to turn the hydrogen into water. I think you've got all kinds of water sitting around a priori. Right. I mean, the Bible says that it was never rained, but there was like a mist, like in the mornings. I mean, just from the environment, whatever. Right. You had a watery environment, which I think was probably the entire environment of the Saturnian system. Right. You've got this picture that you see, like in Troy McLaughlin's other book, right, which shows the heliosphere of the dwarf star, right? The what do you call it? The plasma, like an egg-shaped sort of thing, right? Which is the plasma heliosphere of Saturn, and you've got the rocky bodies like Mars and Earth are inside this plasma heliosphere, right? You've got light. You've got this purple or bluish light bouncing off the interior of this plasma heliosphere and coming back to the rocky bodies from all sides, right? So that you had enough radiant energy, but just, you didn't have the normal light spectrum. It's like the other colors of the light spectrum just were missing, right? So it was like you were living in a black light sort of an environment. And, what I believe to be the case also is, that you had a system wide atmosphere. I mean, everything within that system was like within that same environment, which is basically watery. And when you had the blow up, when you had the major flare, caused by the capture of the system, then you've got the waters of the flood being created. You've got the rings of Saturn, which are water, basically ice, being created, right? And I don't know that you would have had any hydrogen being combined with oxygen in the Earth's own atmosphere. It's like that may or may not have been involved, right? I don't think you needed it. I don't know how much Velikovsky ever knew about dwarf stars, right? I mean, that sort of knowledge. I mean, Velikovsky died in the late 70s.
He was,
I'm sorry?
I said most of the knowledge on this basically cropped up from the ones who were looking into it after Velikovsky. I mean, by that time he was already on the hit list of most of astrophysics.
Yeah. Right. So
most of that was the work of Talbot, Genethal, and all the others who came along after him.
Right. I'm not hearing anything from the Talbots or from anybody connected with the Thunderbolts group. I mean, I don't know what's happened with them. It's like, I am hearing about a conference which may be coming up like in Detroit somewhere along about August of this year. So that may be something. I mean, I could end up being in Detroit here, if things would work out that way. At any rate, I think that's probably about what I had for you guys this evening. Unless anybody else has questions or anything.
You got any questions, Odin? I don't see Odin. Okay.
Is Odin still with us?
I can't tell if Odin.
I'm right here.
Oh, there he is.
Oh, okay.
He's on the floor again.
Okay, no.
Of course. The back is killing me. I just ate banana pudding. And suffering.
Oh, wow.
But, I mean...
Right. Oh, let me ask you a question. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me ask you a question. It's like it's one of these topics which to me is fascinating, but it could end up getting guys bounced straight off of YouTube. It's like, can you get away with talking about like Jeffrey Epstein?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
In that island?
Yeah.
No. I mean,
we can get away with Jeffrey. We just can't use that COVID word. Because everybody wants to.
I mean, what about pizza? Is that a banned word?
No, listen. We don't bite the tongue. If I have to shut down YouTube for a reason, I will.
Okay, look, it's like what I would suggest is that like maybe we want to do one of these things, and just limit it to Rumble and one or two of the other platforms, right? Just not put that on YouTube. It's an interesting topic, but like I say, I would be leery about trying to do that on YouTube because I just had some of my own stuff, like from those interviews with Doc Green just totally disappear off of YouTube recently, right? And that gives me sort of the willies. I mean, that was a lot of good video footage, which that included a thing about Jeffrey Epstein. It included the little thing that we went over recently, which was about Albert Einstein and about the facade of 20th century magic physics, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that would have gotten anybody bounced off of. I don't think that would have gotten anybody bounced from YouTube. Whereas the thing about Jeffrey Epstein might. I don't know. Let me.
That's something to think about.
I know they're trying to say anything about. I'm sorry.
I said that's something to think about for another week. I mean, if we got into it right now, we'd be here for the next 4 or 5 hours, probably.
We got.
How many platforms are you on?
Are we running?
Oh, and how many different platforms?
7. Not including social media.
I know that we're on Facebook. I know the videos are shown on YouTube.
We got.
I think we're on Sirius XM from what Odin said before. Other than that, I don't know.
We're on Rumble. We're on Rokefin. We're on so many platforms. We're on LinkedIn. We're live on Twitter right now. I mean, come on. We're everywhere. We're accessible to everybody.
Okay. Could you talk about Jeffrey Epstein on Twitter and not get banned and not get bounced?
Probably not just yet.
I would just go ahead and do it. I wouldn't give a fuck.
Okay.
there is
Maybe
the fact
not
that
tonight, next
also,
time.
there is the fact that Elon Musk is putting about how the client for Epstein and Maxwell has not been leaked yet, but that's Elon Musk. He's the new,
Right.
he's the incoming owner, but as of yet, he hasn't taken possession of it.
There's a connection between Jeffrey Epstein's island and this thing that you see up there with around Mars, Phobos, right? In other words, the connection is that Russian penetrating radar, which is the best that there is, okay? And I know that the FBI and the U.S., I believe it was like Marines, were using, or they had some kind of contract to use the Russian penetrating radar to
Yeah,
map out.
they've done it, shown that Phobos is hollow.
Yeah, well, I mean, they also the Russians themselves had mapped out Phobos with that penetrating radar, but then also that island of Jeffrey Epstein's, where they were trying to map out the interior and underside of the island. They actually found like one of the exits from the island. Like one of the pipes or something. It's like they were finding the bones of young children, like just outside, just off the island, where one of these conduits was emptying. It's sort of remarkable. And I know that for a while there, you couldn't say anything or talk about Pizzagate or Jeffrey Epstein or any kind of a thing like that on YouTube, right? It was a forbidden topic. The worst censorship that I've seen, like on social media platforms, is on Nextdoor.com, right? Which is supposed to be like your neighborhood, your neighborhood version of something like Facebook, right? And I mean, these people are supposed to be your friends and neighbors. They're not my friends. I mean, these people are like a bunch of Californicators. They're out there in Los Angeles someplace, right? And I mean, I had like one time when I tried. In fact, that article, published in the Journal of Circulation, like the American Heart Association's journal system. Basically, I wrote that story up and gave it over to the main newspaper here in Victoria, Texas, right? The Victoria Advocate, and they said, "Thank you, sir," and published it, right? And then I mentioned this like about 2 days later on Nextdoor.com. My account got blocked for 31 days on account. I mean, how thick is that? It's ridiculous. And I'm going to have to put something out there in the near future, which is probably going to get me banned for all time from Nextdoor. But you're talking about saving children, right? I mean, if I could save 1 or 2 children doing that, I'm just going to say, hey, anything else happens from Nextdoor, it's like it's on them, right? I believe these people have a whole lot of blood on their hands, like just from eliminating discussion of these vaccines, right? That they've basically they're engaged in a conspiracy to defeat the purpose of the Nuremberg Code is what they're doing, right? The Nuremberg Code, I mean, the United States is a signatory, right? And they demand that that nothing like these Nazi medical experiments ever happen again, right? And the idea is that like you have to have like informed consent in order to participate in any kind of medical experiment. Well, I mean, if you shut down every sort of discussion that there is about a vaccine or something like that, well, there's no such thing as informed consent, right? I mean, you can't have it. How are you going to get informed? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, but they don't want to worry about informed consent. They want to just go ahead and do it.
They're talking about, the Biden regime and these lunatic agencies are talking about coming out like in the very near future, like about the 20th of June, with a new version of the Pfizer and other vaccines for children under 5. Right now, what is it? I mean, to my way of thinking, if somebody's going to be taking some 4 or 5-year-old in for these COVID vaccines, then my advice to them is you get yourself a pair of asbestos BVDs, right? I think you're going to need them. You know, I mean, that's what Jesus said, right? He said that, like, you know, anybody who would harm one of these little children, it'd be better off just to have a millstone tied around his neck, have his ass heaved into the ocean. You know, so that's really what you're talking about. I mean, that's just horrendous. I'm going to have to say something like that on Nextdoor, and that's probably going to get me banned from Nextdoor for all time. You know, but we'll see what happens. Were you guys familiar with the story about that American Heart Association, a Journal of Circulation article?
No, I don't know about that one.
That particular one.
We still got time, so tell us about it.
Yep. Yeah, like about the middle of November last year, right? And they came right out and said, that, you know, that these vaccines are terribly dangerous, and, you know, you just shouldn't be having anything to do with them, right? I mean, it's obvious, and, you know, they've done, like, I mean, the Journal of Circulation is like a major peer-reviewed medical journal, right? It's part of the American Heart Association's journal system. I mean, this was a study, and they just said that, you know, the vaccines appear to be what's causing all of the grief with myocarditis. What do you call it? Pericarditis or
Well, have you seen the latest things that they're calling all of these quote unexplained deaths, sudden adult death syndrome?
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Myocarditis, right? They're saying that, like,
sudden adult death syndrome.
yeah, you seem to have 3 groups of people specifically. Yeah, the vaccines seem to be hateful to 3 specific groups. It's going to be like athletes, number 1, and then women, and then like frequent flyers.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, women have experienced all kinds of grief. You know, it's just athletes, you know, particularly soccer players, just dying like flies. It's like the soccer players are like the Energizer rabbit. You know, they just keep on running, right? It's not like American football where you run for 15 seconds, then you sit there for 2 or 3 minutes while they're having a commercial, right? So they're having, I mean, they've had soccer players just dying all over the world. It's like pilots, right? Air crew. Yeah, I think the Carl Vinson has lost about 4 or 5 or 6 pilots over the last 6 or 8 months, right? It's like about 2 months ago, 3 months ago, you had like there was a picture in the newspapers. You had a picture of a pilot. This guy was considered to be an ace pilot, mid-30s. No health problems. I mean, everything, just an ordinary, you know, no serious crosswind, nothing unusual going on. Ordinary, simple landing, right? I mean, everyday sort of a thing. This guy had one of these COVID shots like 2 days prior. He comes in. He said he was about a third of a mile from the flight deck. It's one of the super carriers, you know, Carl Vinson. So a third of a mile out, he said his whole body just locked up. He couldn't do anything. He finally managed to get one hand on the eject lever. It was all he could do. I mean, he managed to pull the lever just as the this is an F-35, just as the F-35 hit the flight deck of the carrier. It's splowy, right? People running in every direction. It's like the pilot and the airplane both ended up in the Pacific Ocean, right? They managed to fish the pilot out of the ocean. The airplane, I think, is probably still down there with Davy Jones. And, you know, you've got good hospital facilities on the super carriers. And they said this was an extreme case of myocarditis, right? And, you know, the pilot said that he just had no control over his body, so it was everything in the world he could do to get one hand on the eject lever for the stupid airplane, you know. And they said things like that have gotten to be common. It's like, you know, airplanes just, you know, they've been lucky so far. I mean, just the fact that they have pilots and co-pilots and then, like, computerized flight control. I mean, you see, you've got 3 things have to fail, you know, before the airplane really crashes on account of it. But I mean,
yeah, it has nothing to do with the engine parts. It has nothing to do with the vaccines. it's just that so many people who take them and then die doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, well, I know. Oh, it's crazy, and the hell of it is that, like, what we've seen up until now may really be the tip of an iceberg. It's like I think we'll have a little bit clearer picture of it along about November, December, January. But I mean, this could get to be real ugly. If the worst, uh, you know, if the worst predictions that I read were to come true, right, then I mean, it's just it can be completely horrible. Now the thing's been hogging up all the news cycles recently. I mean, to the point that, like, haven't been reading much about the vaccines. Is like Ukraine, right? And has anybody else in your group been wanting to talk about the Ukraine recently? Odin?
No, I haven't been listening too much about Ukraine. People talk. I barely listen to the shows now because I got so much I have to do while the shows are on.
Mm-hmm. No, that's interesting. It's like, this to me is terribly interesting because what you've really what you've had happening is that Vladimir Putin has made an art form out of making monkeys out of some of the worst villains on the planet. And this includes, like, banking type villains and NATO, DOD, right? The military industrial complex. I mean, Rothschilds, all these lunatics. And I mean, he's made monkeys out of them. I mean, monkeys with a capital M. This stuff is unbelievable. I mean, you've got like about two or three places where you can find real information, right, that I know of. It's like on a regular basis. You've got a thing called the Saker, S-A-K-E-R, thesaker.com, right, which is, related to the Russian government, right? And then you've got like another thing, which is I could send you that information. But it's just interesting as to what's been going on. I mean, up until just lately, it's like the mainstream media in the West has been making it sound as if Russians were getting their asses kicked in. And that's just that's not what's been happening. No, I mean, I believe that the Ukrainian state is like about 3 or 4 weeks away from ceasing to exist. I think that they're in a place where the only rational thing they could do is surrender, right? And the government won't let them even take a step backwards, right? And the Pentagon won't let the Kiev government allow these guys to do anything rational. And they really just want the Ukrainians to fight to the last man to protect Joe Biden, right? Because you're talking about, like, since the deep state takeover, like in 2014, the Ukraine has just become the worldwide center for gangsterism and major kinds of gangsterism, child trafficking, money laundering, every kind of illegal and heinous shit, that goes on in the world that, like, no other place to try to do. Well, I mean, there it all is, right? They've had like about 30 different biowar laboratories, financed and run by Americans. It's like, one of them was producing an aerosolized version of rabies. Like, what could go wrong? These people not believe in earthquakes and wind. I mean, all it would take, it would be like having an earthquake and a windstorm going on at the same time, at some kind of a place where you're dealing with aerosolized rabies. You have the whole country dying of rabies. They had one kind of a place that was working on a DNA-based bioweapon, which is specifically target people of Russian ancestry. Now, you don't think that's going to get Vladimir Putin pissed off? God bless. And then, to top it all off, aside from wanting to have the Ukraine join NATO and bring NATO weapons up to the borders of Russia, aside from having Ukraine talking about, obtaining nuclear weapons, they were 4 days away from invading the Donbass. So Vladimir Putin beat him to the punch by about 4 or 5 days. They had apparently upwards of 100,000 soldiers that were ready to roll straight on into the Donbass, and it's just no way in the world the Russians are going to tolerate that. But they've reached the point right now where they're down to the bottom of the manpower pool. It's like they don't have any real frontline soldiers. They've been sending territorial guard people to the front lines and drafting teenagers who never touched a firearm in their lives and sending these teenagers out there to face the Russian military. It's the most dangerous military organization on the face of the earth, right?
Yeah.
Have you seen the pictures of this?
They want Ukraine to
I'm sorry?
die. Protect their secrets.
They're certainly not doing anything for any of the normal people in Ukraine, right? And they're wanting to spend dollars that we don't even have, for arms and munitions for the Ukraine, supposedly, right? But I mean, they're not talking about the Ukraine getting any of that. They're talking about sending Ukraine vast storehouses worth of outdated equipment, right? And then is sending most of that 40 billion to military industrial complex firms, to replenish our own supplies with more modern weapons, right? But what you've had happen over the last couple of decades at least is that we've been spending most of our military budget on playing Globocop around the world, right? And the Russians have been building a whole new generation of weapons. We don't match up with the Russian military anymore. I mean, I wouldn't even know where to start, right? But it's the people in NATO are just sitting there just shaking. It's they've just seen what would happen to NATO. I'm sorry?
They're in panic mode.
Yeah, they've just seen what would happen to NATO. Now, the other thing is that aside from weapons and aside from shooting people and things like that, right, then you've also got two other kinds of wars going on at the same time. You've got a propaganda war, which, I mean, the Russians have finally just sort of caught up with. It's they're way behind. They don't have anything like our mainstream media, right? They don't have a propaganda organ like that. So I mean, they've been losing that one. But it's aside from the military struggle, it's you've got an economic and financial war which has been going on, and this is the place where Putin has really made the idiots look like monkeys. I mean, what he's done to them along those lines is beyond belief. I mean, sanctions, right? Banning oil imports from Russia. I mean, you have no idea. There aren't words in the English language to describe how stupid that is. They don't have anything to replace Russian oil with. It's there's a bunch of yuppies and idiots that have gone and declared all this stuff, bans on Russian oil. It's they don't have anything to replace Russian oil or anything that can replace the Russian oil with. You can't just substitute one kind of oil for another.
Nope.
It's a refinery has to be built in such a way as to use a certain kind of oil, right? The oil which the Russians have supplied to these guys is a particularly good grade of oil, and the price has been very reasonable. It's very cheap, right? So I mean, the whole European economy has been built around Russian oil. It's all of a sudden, oh gee, it's we just, the Americans tell us that Putin is evil, right? He's a bad man, and we've got to, we can't buy oil from Russia anymore. Guess what? Then fools, it's you're all going to die, right? I mean, that's what they've signed up for. They've signed up for a seppuku, right? And they've signed up to commit suicide.
Mm-hmm.
It's like food, right? I mean, Russia and Ukraine between them probably account for at least half of the grain, wheat, particularly, wheat and rye and other kinds of things which is sold in the world, right? Exported. And all of a sudden, nobody's even allowed to buy Russian wheat anymore or anything like that. Wheat, fertilizer, right? Chemical fertilizers, nitrogen fertilizers. Russia supplies most of that to the world. It's exported, right? All of a sudden, nobody can buy, chemical fertilizers from Russia. And then, You get, I call him Sideline Joe, right? Joe Biden. And Joe Biden all of a sudden shuts down, right as the spring planting season starts, he shuts down all rail transport of chemical fertilizers within the United States, right? Starting with the Union Pacific. You can't carry that stuff around like on trucks, too freaking heavy. You know, truck has to go like uphill, then downhill, then uphill, then downhill, then uphill, and around bends and around. You know, I mean, trucks don't drive in straight lines, but trains do, right? So in other words, I mean, trains are just vastly cheaper to ship things which are terribly heavy, you know, like fertilizer. But all of a sudden, it's like Joe Biden just shuts down the whole, you know, spring planting season in the United States, the whole food infrastructure system in the United States. And within the last 3 or 4 months, you've had like you've had our whole food infrastructure which has been under attack. It's like, you know, you've had like major food processing and distribution sites being, you know, burned down or blown up all over the country, and you've had 2 of them being hit by airplanes within the space of a month or so. I mean, that's. I was a math major in school, right? I mean, you know, I don't believe in coincidences like that. You know, I believe in the laws of averages, but I'm sorry?
There's no such thing as a good old-fashioned coincidence anymore. But gentlemen, we have to end the show. Time's up. We have a show coming on at 10:30 tonight, and I gotta set up for it. But I like the Valkyrie. You know what to do.
Say good night.
Good night, Valkyrie.
Good night, Valkyrie.
And we'll continue this next week because it's getting ready to get interesting. Now we're going into this socio-political arena, and it's about time.
It's gonna get nasty.
Yeah, okay, well, it's like that's probably got to do it for tonight. Okay, it's like, yeah, I think that's about as much as I had for you that resembles like human origins or catastrophism or anything like that. I'm glad I could answer some of these questions about the flood, right? Because that really is an interesting topic.
Yes, that was.
And like I say, it's an article of faith. It's an article of faith amongst a lot of scientists. The flood itself is a fairy tale right now. I mean, I guarantee you it's not a fairy tale. Let me catch up with you guys a bit later here. Okay? Stop sharing. And could you log me out of the conference?
Oh, yeah. I got you. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
All righty.
Okay. Take care. Right.